following orders of the military junta in Niger after the coup. France has started pulling out its troops from the country as about 1,400 soldiers are evacuated by road. The move kicks off a complex and sensitive process that French President Emmanuel Macron expects to be completed by the end of the year, drawing the curtain on another French anti-jihadist operation in Africa. Take a listen.
Following demands by Niger's military rulers, the French forces in the country have departed the landlocked West African country. Officials of the Niger military had on July 26th toppled the democratic government of Mohamed Bazoum, leading to local jubilation and an international outrage. The Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, an umbrella body for countries in the sub-region, threatened to restore the government of Bazoum, but met opposition from the people and social critics. Pickup trucks and armored personnel carriers APCs filled with French soldiers were seen heading out of Niger to Chad, guarded by the Nigerian military force. The troops, about 1,500 of them, have left Niger after the government called on the people to show support to the junta. French President Emmanuel Macron had agreed to the demands of the new military leaders in September as the French military continues to decongest its numbers in West Africa. The United States government, one of Niger's strategic anti-terrorism partners, has suspended its assistance to the country as it officially recognized the emergence of the junta as a coup. However, the government has said its troops, numbering up to 1,000, will remain in Niger while the country will drastically reduce its monetary support as it called for a constitutional return to democracy, a request so far rebuffed by the military rulers. The United States also confirmed that it has suspended up to $200 million scheduled to assist Niger in its fight against insecurity after pausing the program in August. Furthermore, it has also suspended its $302 million Niger Regional Transportation Compact assistance, while the rest of the sub-region and the African Union have frowned against the military rulers.
Now, joining me tonight in the program to discuss this is Chimezie Iwuagwu, the National Spokesman, Institute of Safety Professionals in Nigeria. And joining from Imo State is David, and joining also from Accra, Ghana, is David Otto, security analyst. David Otto is the director of the Geneva Center for Africa Security and Strategic Studies. He joins us from Abuja. Now, thanks for joining us on the program, gentlemen. A warm welcome to you. I'll start with David. Now, David, given the complexity of the Sahel region's security landscape, could you provide a nuanced analysis of the specific threats and challenge that the withdrawal of French forces from Niger might create?
Well, thank you very much, Gbenga. Principally, and indirect to your question, the French forces that we've seen moving from Mali, of course, when they were sent away by the military junta towards Burkina Faso, now they have been moved away from Niger. This was, as a result of the condemnation by the military juntas of these countries. Remember, as you rightly said, the French forces were, brought in, in support by these countries to fight against insurgency. Apparently, the evaluation by these military juntas has demonstrated that the French forces have not been able to deliver, as the case may be, in respect to what the military juntas have said. Yes, as we've seen in the case of Mali, there will be gaps that will be left unfilled by the withdrawal of French forces. But these countries are sovereign states, and they've decided, based on their assessment of the insurgency threats, that it is time for the French forces to leave. We have seen an uptake in terms of the number of attacks that jihadists in Mali, for example, in the case of Geneva, which is the Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliate in that region, ISGS, that, we've also seen the rise of the Azawad movement, which, has come as a result of the absence of the Operation Barkhane, which was then, named as the French military intervention to fight against insurgency. So this withdrawal, Gbenga, from Niger, as we've seen, of course, it's going to give an opportunity for many jihadist groups to continue to see this as a key time for them to attack the Nigerian forces when they're focused on stabilization, when they're focused on consolidation of power. I'll give way to you, Gbenga. Go ahead.
Now, David, staying with you, David, looking at the examples in Mali that you just mentioned with regards to the French pulling out Operation Barkhane and all of that. Some might argue, critics will argue that, you know, when the French were there, they didn't do much to stop this violence insurgent, that it was bound to happen anyway. So it's better to try a different method or invite new partners in securing countries. Do you think that is correct in its entirety, that, you know, it's not like the French ended violence extremism in Mali, Burkina Faso, and countries where they were involved in the last decade?
Yeah, that's very correct. And this is one of the bases in which the Malian, the Burkinabes, and the Nigerians have based the idea that the French are no longer welcome. Because, of course, the mission was very specific to deal with the insurgency. But after years, you know, remember this was since in 2012, 2013, which led to just after the overthrow of Gaddafi. And more than a decade, or just close to a decade, we haven't seen the jihadists being eliminated. So by the count of the Malian, Nigerian, and Burkinabe governments, they believe that it's high time for them to take over and bring in new partners. And that is why Gbenga have to mention that these three countries formed what we call now the Goma Alliance,
Yes.
which, of course, talks about an establishment of a tripartite union to fight against insurgency. So effectively, what they're saying is we can do it ourselves. The French have been unable to deal with insurgency. And of course, you know, they have to go. But there will be gaps, no doubt. But I think, you know, with time, these countries would, you know, kind of stabilize if they do indeed help each other to fight against the movements like Al-Qaeda and ISIS in their backyards. Over to you, Gbenga.
Thank you very much. David, I'd like to bring in Timothy Chimezie Iwuagwu, National Spokesman for the Institute of Safety Professionals, who's joined us from Imo State into the conversation. A warm welcome to you, Timothy, and let's get straight to it. Timothy, what critical considerations should be taken into account when evaluating the risk involved in the French troops' journey from Niger to Chad through potentially insecure territory? Do you believe, because there's so much anti-French sentiment in this country, that, you know, moving this amount of troops by road, are there any danger that you envisage? And also, what's your evaluation of the French mission, the French troops in Niger? Do they help in any way to stop violent extremism in the country? How would you rate their performance in that regard?
Thank you. Good evening. I've been concerned also about the pulling out of the troops. Of course, I know they cannot just pull out at once. It's a process. And then going by road, we know the hazards, the dangers associated with such operation, especially in a region that is relatively hostile, where there's discontent among the peoples of the region. The Sahel region has been very volatile. Extremism has been their way in recent times. In the past 10 years, we have had so much about extremism within the Sahel region of Africa. And then we have also seen that the extremism only grows and flourishes where we have a poor governance. That's where we have government without adequate governance, where the control of the situation is not really much in the hands of the government. And the French have always played the role of a master, and that has caused some people to complain about neo-colonialist tendencies, especially when the government cannot really provide for its people. So there's a lot of discontent, and extremism will flourish because there's really no control in that area. Well, we know the French have been there for long. How much they've been able to control the place remains an issue of debate, because if you look at it critically, they have provided protection for areas of their interest, primarily.
Nuclear energy.
Exactly. They wouldn't want the extremists to tamper with where they get their nuclear materials, uranium, and the rest of those materials that are of value to them. I think those things are more of value than the people of.
And I guess it was part of the motivations that did lead the military to tell them, the junta in Niger, to tell the French that it's time to pack your bags and leave. Thank you very much, Timothy. Now, back to you, David. Could you elaborate on the political motivations and long-term goals of Niger's military rulers in demanding the departure of French forces and the impact this has had on Niger's political landscape and the Sahel region in general? We've seen that it's almost like a contagion effect. There's growing anti-French sentiment in the Sahel belt. It happened in Burkina Faso, it happened in Mali. We've now seen it happen in Niger. Everybody wants the French to leave. But what impact will this have on the political and security landscape?
Okay. The French have argued several times that they do not see the Niger junta as a legitimate government. They insisted until the end, and they had to give in to that. They insisted that they still consider President Bazoum, who was overthrown as the legitimate leader. But I think, that ship has sailed, and the French have decided to move on, to withdraw the ambassador, to also withdraw their forces as we speak. From a political point, this is some kind of a win-win for the military junta at this point in time, because of course it does demonstrate that pressure from the military junta via the population of Niger to go out to the streets and call out the French using anti-French sentiments, blockade the embassy, from access, to logistics, to the French. That has won them a lot of hearts and minds, between themselves, of course. Military,
David, permit me to interrupt.
Niger, but also
permit me to jump into this conversation because of something I want to pick on what you said. You mentioned the hearts and minds. Is the junta just whipping up popular sentiment to try to legitimize their coup d'etat by whipping up anti-French sentiments, and or do they really have strategically, security speaking, and politically legitimate grounds to demand the exit of the French?
Well, I think for once, yes, they're using it to wipe up, to kind of whip up the anti-French sentiment. But in terms of, if they have a plan, one has to see, the taste of the pudding is in the eating. The Nigerian junta is yet to be given the opportunity. They are still struggling with the 3-year transitional period which they proposed with ECOWAS. ECOWAS hasn't responded to that. Niger is still suffering from, sanctions and, isolation from certain countries. So the military junta has not yet been given the opportunity to demonstrate what kind of strategy they do have, not just for defeating the jihadists, but also for the economy. So they have a task at hand, which they need to prove. They need an opportunity to do that. We're waiting on ECOWAS to come up with some kind of an agreement, maybe a shortened time for a transitional government that would be perhaps 1 year or 1.5 years, depending on how much is required in practical terms, by the military junta to deal with these issues. Now, from a political point, I think the Niger junta now has more support from neighboring Burkina Faso and Mali, in which I believe, as I mentioned earlier on, they set up Article 3 of the Niptako-Goma Agreement, which clearly states that all three countries would, come together to form some kind of a multi or a triple anti-insurgency movement, which, of course, would be something like the multinational joint task force or the G5 Sahel. Yes. But we're still yet to see the Nigerians given the opportunity to go on the field and demonstrate to the people that beyond the anti-French sentiment, which they've been talking about to get French out of the country, it's now the pressure is back on them. Albert waiting for ECOWAS to come back to them to deliver to the population. Else, there's a possibility that we might see some, internal retaliation by coupist movement within the military or by the people themselves. But, we still have to wait and see, Gbenga.
Thank you very much, David. Now, I would like to bring in our third guest into the conversation, Adib Saani, a security expert who's joined us from the Guinean capital, Accra. Now, Adib, a warm welcome to you. Adib Saani, with neighboring Mali and Burkina Faso already experiencing significant rebel activity and violent extremism, could you detail the potential spillover effects of the French withdrawal on regional stability and counterterrorism efforts? Do you see much of a vacuum by the French withdrawal and this recent activities, rebel activities and violent extremism we're witnessing in these countries that the French had a presence before? Would you liken it to, would you say it's related to the departure of French troops?
Well, there's a bit of a confusion because at the time the French were present in Burkina Faso, according to the Global Terrorism Index, Burkina Faso was the second most impacted country by terrorism in the whole world after Afghanistan. Despite the presence of the French in the Sahel region, the Sahel region is the most impacted region in the whole world by terrorism, accounting for over 40% of attacks worldwide. However, when the French left, for example, in Niger and Burkina Faso, we've seen a spike in the number of attacks. Just recently, there was an ambush in Mali, resulting in the deaths of some Malian soldiers, and I understand some Wagner, fighters as well. Currently, as we speak, Mali is in a state of mess. The Malian government is fighting Al-Qaeda-linked militants, ISIS-linked militants, and the Tuareg rebels in the northern part of the country. So the situation, I must say, has become extremely sticky for the Malian authorities. Same can be said for Niger. We've seen a steady rise in the number of brazen attacks against the Nigerian, troops in the country. And I am very worried about the spillover effect, like you mentioned, because of the tightly knit nature of our societies within the sub-region. The probability that whatever happens in one country could spill over into another country is quite high. And this is based on historical antecedents, because we remember that during the conflicts in the Ivory Coast between 2010 and 2011, we had fighters from Liberia joining the fray. We've also had in recent years terrorist elements able to stage cross-border attacks from Nigeria into Niger and Chad. We've also had terrorist elements staging attacks from Mali into Burkina Faso, from Burkina Faso into countries such as the Ivory Coast, Benin, and of course Togo. Ghana is the only country that has been untouched by the terrorism menace, but there are a lot of there's a lot of research pointing to the fact that they might have already arrived, just that they are using Ghana as a transport hub.
And it doesn't mean that Ghana is, it's not yet Uhuru. It doesn't mean that they should just go and sleep with both eyes. They need to, because there's an African saying that if your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't go to sleep with both eyes. So Ghana needs to be on red alert security-wise to contain this spillover effect of violent extremism in the region. Thank you, Adib Saani. Now, back to you, Timothy, in Imo State. In light of the French departure, what comprehensive measures do you think are in place to prevent a security vacuum in Niger? And what strategies can be employed to mitigate associated risk? Talking about strategy, we've seen the natural course of action. There's military agreements with Russia, and the Wagner group sometimes feels this void left by the French when they depart. We've seen it happen in Mali, and there are talks of Wagner. There's talks of a Wagner presence in Burkina Faso. Do you think it will be adequate if Niger tries to go the way of all the countries that we've seen coups happen, and we've seen a departure of a significant amount of French troops? Do you think Burkina Faso, do you think Niger has the capacity to fill that vacuum the way things are as we speak?
Well, I will start by saying that when we are defining the word disaster is a situation that the affected state cannot handle, or affected community or society cannot handle using its own resources, which means they are compelled to call for assistance from elsewhere. And now the departure of the French military is definitely going to leave a vacuum. And nature abhors vacuum. And for example, now we have seen the situation. Why did the coup peace come? Why did the junta come in? Why did they interfere with what we know as democratic system? Whether that is a real democratic system, because the West that taught us democracy, or that presented democracy to us, are operating real democracy, because it is, I'm using the word real, because it's relatively real, because it is producing the results. But in our own case, it's not producing the results. Corruption is free for all. Suffering, poverty is weaponized, and the people are agitations and all that. Then the leaders are having the best of everything, from security to wealth and the commonwealth, and the other stakeholders feel short off the line, and they had to agitate, and that is natural. Now, the French leaving this vacuum, definitely the new military leaders will definitely call for assistance and support from friendly nations that are willing to give support. We have heard the United States, that would be surprising to some persons to hear that the United States now recognizes, whether fully or partially, the military government in Niger. And there's a reason for that. It's not enough to just discard them and condemn the people. There must be some also inner view of what prompted this whole situation.
Strategic considerations.
Exactly, because the Americans have some interest, and they have military base that costs them a lot of money there. And then just dismantling and leaving is not just an easy thing. They have such problems in northwest also of Japan, in Okinawa. They have such controversial situations. That is not a situation of a military coup. But if you look at it, it is an offense to cause somebody to commit an offense. If the military junta in Niger Republic have violated democracy, then it is an offense for our democratic leaders to provoke the incursion of the military into a democratic system, disrupting whatever is on the ground. Remember that the coupists complained that the president had caused them to lose men by asking them to wait for the French to give instruction before they could attack the extremists. And that is a very serious indictment. And everybody seems to forget about that too.
Yes, it borders on violating your country's sovereignty, and it might be considered as treasonable in some aspects. Thank you very much, Timothy. Now, before we go on a break, I'd like to bring in David back into the conversation, and let's pick up from where Timothy left. Timothy mentioned something quite instructive. The United States is a very important player in this region where we talk about the intricate geopolitical strategic considerations and maneuvering by the Niger government. On one hand, the United Nations formally declared the coup as a coup, and the implication of that is that it will suspend assistance to Niger and the country's governance, security, and socio-economic development. But at the same time, and people tend to find this contradictory, is its decision to maintain its troops' presence in Niger. It still has a big drone base there, and it doesn't seem to stop it from operating its drone base and, you know, still respecting the military agreements it has with the Niger government. So how do you interpret the American presence in this situation and the contradictions that seem to be therein?
Well, I think, Gbenga, you know, the contradiction is seen by you and I. The U.S. is simply applying its national interest, its geopolitical interest in terms of maintaining its military base in Niger. And that military base in Niger serves not just Niger, but other countries in the sub-Saharan Africa. The U.S. knows and understands that the French brand has become toxic. And the U.S. is very ready, in spite of being an ally to the French, from a Western perspective. But the U.S. is very ready to throw France under the bus, and it has done so. The French were not very happy, but the U.S. has simply, stepped in when the French have been asked to step out. And you'd remember that the decision by the United States to consider this as a coup and not an attempted coup came after the French said, well, we're leaving, and they gave a date to which they're leaving. So the U.S. knows that it now has a much more stronger position, in spite of the fact that it has suspended about $500 million of aid that should go to Niger. But I can promise you that the language has been very clear from the U.S. perspective. Release President Bazoum and his top ministers, not reinstate him. That means the U.S. is looking forward to a transitional period where the military junta would perhaps hand over the government to democratically elected civilians. And what that implies is that the U.S. will now have full control in terms of geopolitical partnership. Now, what the U.S. has been doing, Gbenga, I have to add, is that the U.S. is making sure that, unlike in countries like Mali and Burkina Faso, where when the French were kicked out, Russia stepped in, the U.S. wants to make sure that it doesn't happen in the case of Niger. And that is why the U.S. perhaps, has whispered, to the ears of France and said, listen, you leave, I stay, we stay. So it's a compromise that perhaps the French, may have had, a back chat with the United States to say, we're one, if I leave, you stay, then it's, the French still have a chance from a Western perspective to secure Niger. So, my concern is that the French, are kind of prostituting in terms of how they're moving away from one, African countries with their military and, transferring their military bases to Chad. And perhaps, one would not be surprised.
I mean, Chad seems to be the only French-friendly country in a very hostile anti-French region.
For now. We don't know how long that will last. I mean, the French had seen Niger as the last bastion, as the best of all the countries in the Sahel. So that judgment, has been proven to be extremely wrong. Now they've moved to Chad. I think Chad for them is, the weakest link because, of course, President Mohamed, Deby was himself a beneficiary of a military coup. So I think the French will be scratching their head and thinking, we have no choice but to deal with, the smaller evil against the bigger one, from their perspective. But it's all bad news for the French. I think, from Chad, we will see the military driving towards Paris.
Thank you very much, David Otto. A fine place to go on a break. You're watching Secure the Continent, and we're looking at the departure of French troops from Niger, the implications for security for the country and also the wider West Africa sub-region. Do stay with us. We'll be right back after this break. Thank you for staying with us. If you're just joining us, to Secure the Continent, and we've been looking at the evacuation, the departure of French troops from Niger and its implication. We still have in the program Chimezie Iwuagwu, the national spokesman, Institute of Safety Professionals in Nigeria, joins us from Imo State. We also have David Otto, security analyst, who's joining us from Accra, Ghana, and also Adib, Saani, security analyst. Thanks for staying on the program, gentlemen. Now, to Adib, Saani, to address the security implications of the French troops' withdrawal, could you delve into the specific collaboration strategies and international efforts to fight against terrorism in the Sahel? In your opening statement, you did mention the risk, the spillover effects of West African coastal states that are not even in the Sahel. You mentioned Benin, which has seen some violent extremist activities in its northern part, and also Togo. Ghana seems to be the only one who is spared for now. And looking at ECOWAS, beyond the way they, roar like lions when a coup happens, and strong statements, we're going to invade, we condemn this. What are they doing to really help their neighbors, even though they might be military governments, but they have serious violent extremist and jihadi problems that have widespread implications for the West African sub-region? David just mentioned the tripartite sort of agreements with the countries that recently had coups, Guinea, Niger, and also Burkina Faso. What's ECOWAS doing to help these countries who are suffering from violence extremism?
Well, I'm glad we have a general consensus to the effect that what is happening in Burkina Faso, what is happening in Mali, is a sub-regional security challenge that we would have to work hard to overcome. And I'm happy that we have all agreed to the fact that the possibility of a spillover into countries such as Ghana is high. That notwithstanding, what I see based on my personal observation is the fact that ECOWAS seems to be much more fixated on these countries returning to civilian authorities or democratic rule, rather than dealing with the fundamental issues of restoring security there first before anything. And because of that, I have not seen any commitment on the part of ECOWAS so far to help the junta in Mali or Niger or Burkina Faso to deal with these insecurities that is threatening to envelop the whole country and perhaps spread to other parts of the subcontinent. So in essence, what I'm saying is, or perhaps appealing, is for ECOWAS to do more, perhaps through ECOMOG, through joint sort of cooperation with the AU, to do more to work to improve security in these countries. I remember last year when members of the Accra Initiative met in Accra. Indeed, other countries were in attendance, and I proposed the need for an Accra Initiative standby force. And truly it was adopted. So what are we doing? What are they doing? What is the commitment level of these countries? How many soldiers or police are they willing to contribute? So
Adib, Saani, I want to pick up a point you mentioned, follow up on a very important issue you mentioned there. Is it that, why do we see such a slow pace of cooperation among ECOWAS when it comes to, helping the neighbors deal with the security situation? Is it that they feel, there's no clear and present danger to their countries when it comes to, they think, Burkina Faso is a faraway place, it's a sovereign nation, let them deal with their own problems? Or is it as a result of resources, mobilizing troops, committing troops to a cause does have serious financial implications. So what do you make of this?
Well, I think it's a myriad of issues, one of it being the internal politics of these countries. For example, in Ghana, when the Niger issue came up, it was a very unpopular option to even consider going into Niger. Look, a lot of Ghanaians were so livid about the fact that ECOWAS even brought the idea to the table. Because for a lot of Ghanaians, when day breaks, what matters to them is the bread and butter issues, how to afford a single meal a day. And we are going into an election next month, and already the economy is crawling. The Nigerian economy is also crawling because of two main issues, COVID-19 and the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So if we have a war situation right before our noses, you can imagine the crippling economic ramifications it would have for the wider West African sub-region. Besides, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger have gone into a military pact. So what it means is any attempt to intervene in any of these countries would spark a wider sub-regional confrontation, which would have serious economic consequences. And that is why I think that countries are not so keen on going in, not because they are not concerned about the threat to their security.
Timothy in Imo, back to you. Considering the complexities of democratic transition, governance, and foreign aid, could you expound on the potential impact of the coup and assistance suspension on Niger's political and socio-economic stability? Do you think it's time for ECOWAS to reconsider these sanctions and perhaps give the Niger junta a timeline which both could work out? Because there's serious, Niger is already dealing with the security situation. And then when you block their borders and you suspend them and impose this embargo, it does have serious socio-economic implications which might affect the stability of the country in the long run. Would you suggest ECOWAS reconsiders the sanction regime and mandate and try to negotiate with the junta, or they should stay with their hardline position that Mohamed Bazoum was returned to the government house in Niamey? Hello, Timothy, are you there?
I didn't know I muted myself. Okay,
yes.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're now audible. Go ahead, please.
All right. The position of the West African regional body, ECOWAS, blocking aids and movement of materials to Niger in the name of trying to restore democracy, the democracy that needs a redefinition becomes questionable and unacceptable. Every country has its own sovereignty that must be respected. And then this sovereignty is something unalienable. We don't see anybody coming to dictate for another nation. If they are part of ECOWAS, they are part of ECOWAS by their own volition. It's a willful issue. If they decide not to be, nobody will force it down their throat. Countries can pull off from regional economic blocs. The United Kingdom did it. They are not part of the Eurozone today. And then they are still existing and relating with other European countries. And then Africa, it's time for Africa to redefine democracy. If ECOWAS had to punish the junta in Niger Republic by blocking the way, how many people are they punishing? They are punishing the entire country. The realities today cannot be overemphasized. The protection of the regional bloc, their policies tend to be to the benefit of the ruling class. The other members of society are relegated and abandoned at the mercy of hunger, poverty, extremism, terrorists, killing, maiming, raping, and nothing is said. By now, we expected the regional bloc, ECOWAS, the West African body, to even think of how to bring Ghana, bring Nigeria, Cameroon, Chad, Niger, Burkina Faso together and form a formidable coalition to fight extremism within the Sahel region. But we have abandoned that. Everybody is saying restore.
Dragon, and I do agree with your point that ECOWAS needs to be more proactive when it comes to dealing with the issue of violent extremism in the country. Just quickly, David, as we begin to wind down on this conversation, as we wrap up, what comprehensive diplomatic and security measures should be taken to address the evolving situation? It seems Niger is on its own right now with its fellow junta neighbors in the region, the countries that have decided to form this alliance. How can they help their situation here and contain security challenges in the Sahel, taking into account the interest of regional and global powers?
Well, you're very correct, Gbenga. I think my colleague Timothy mentioned the fact that ECOWAS should not have, also I think Saani did mention that, but I think we've got to be able to understand that Niger Republic is a signatory of the Lome Protocol. Article 20, I think, did demand that in the event of a military coup or an unconstitutional removal of a democratically elected government, then of course ECOWAS could intervene. The problem that ECOWAS had in the beginning is that it did not have a standby force in which to intervene, not just in the case of Niger, but Burkina Faso and Mali. And that's why that standby force has been activated at this point in time. I just wanted to make that very clear. But in terms of the way forward, I think what would be much more important at this point in time is that, yes, there is a coup that has happened. President Bazoum has been taken out of power unconstitutionally. Now the control is in the hands of the military junta. What ECOWAS and other international organizations, or perhaps the US, must be able to do at this point in time is to support the military junta, if it is backed by the popular support of the Nigerians, to support them to have a transitional government and therefore to organize elections, which would then bring back some kind of a constitutional government in power. I think this is what needs to be done. I mean, the whole idea that ECOWAS, could intervene militarily at this point in time is too late. And I think that should be shielded.
And it would even
entirely.
make this situation worse, regardless. Thank you very much, David. Otto, Timothy Chimezie, and Adib Saani in Accra, Ghana. It was an absolute pleasure speaking with all three of you. Thanks for your contribution and your insights. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To avoid a security vacuum and address the challenge of violent extremism, as French forces depart Niger, the Nigerian government must pursue a multifaceted approach. Firstly, they should prioritize strengthening their own security forces, enhancing their capacity and professionalism, while also investing in intelligence and surveillance capabilities to monitor extremist activities. Secondly, the government could engage in regional and international cooperation, collaborating with neighboring countries and international partners to create a unified front against extremist groups that operate across borders. Additionally, they must address the root causes of extremism by improving governance, social services, and economic opportunities in marginalized areas, which are often breeding grounds for radicalization. Lastly, it is essential to promote dialogue and reconciliation efforts with local communities to build trust and deter support for extremist ideologies. This comprehensive strategy should help Niger mitigate the risk of a security vacuum and make progress towards ending violent extremism in the country. Thank you for watching, but remember to stay safe and alert at all times. I am Gbenga Aborowa. See you next time on Secure the Continent. Bye-bye.